"You don't deserve this room." The nurse's voice dropped like poison, soft enough to sound like a secret but sharp enough to slice the silence of the ICU. Her hand rested on his chest as if she owned the air he breathed. Monitors beeped steady. Green lines flickered across the screens. To anyone walking by, it looked like an ordinary patient in recovery. But this wasn't ordinary. This was deliberate. The man in the bed was not broken, not helpless. He was awake behind closed eyes, every word piercing deeper than the IV in his arm. A black billionaire, a CEO who had built an empire on resilience, lying perfectly still pretending to be in a coma, and she didn't know. The nurse leaned closer, blonde hair brushing forward, her whisper a blade. "People think he's special because he's rich, but look at him, just another black man with money he didn't earn. If he wakes up, I'll make sure he learns where he really belongs." Her words filled the room like smoke, silent, choking, impossible to ignore. He did not move, not yet. His breathing stayed calm, measured, an anchor in a storm he had already expected, because this wasn't the first time he'd heard it. At 22, denied a mortgage despite triple collateral. At 35, questioned at a dealership he later bought. And now, at 50, inside a hospital he partly owned, the same old poison flowed again. The nurse straightened her posture, glanced at the glowing monitors, then smirked. VIP care? For him? If this were a white client, he'd be in the top floor suite. But him? He doesn't belong here. None of them ever do. Outside the glass door, a young resident froze mid-step. Clipboard in hand, pen hovering above paper, his jaw tightened. He had heard everything. His eyes flicked to the patient, then to the nurse, back again. He did not move, but the tension in his grip said enough. The lie was unraveling. Inside, the CEO's finger twitched beneath the sheet, barely noticeable, deliberate, a signal to himself, patience. Because power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it lets arrogance dig its own grave. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to him. The nurse leaned even closer, voice dripping contempt. "I bet even his money's dirty, that's how they all rise. Fraud, favors, shortcuts, not one of them belongs at the top." The monitors didn't change, but the air did. Heavy, charged, alive with a storm building just beneath the stillness. He stayed silent, because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. And she had no idea she was confessing every sin to the one man who could end her career with a single word. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, washing the room in sterile white. To the nurse, it was just another shift. To him, it was theater, and she was revealing herself in every careless line. She adjusted the IV drip, her fingers deliberate, her tone venomous but casual, as if prejudice were part of the routine. Imagine the board wasting resources on him. A black man in a VIP suite? What a joke. If this hospital had any standards, he'd be down the hall with the charity cases. Her words dripped into the quiet like acid. The monitor answered only with its steady pulse. Behind the glass, the resident clenched his clipboard tighter. He wasn't supposed to intervene. Interns observe, record, stay invisible. But his chest burned as the nurse's words stacked higher, each more toxic than the last. The billionaire didn't move. His stillness wasn't weakness, it was calculation. Every insult was evidence. Every assumption was another line carved into the record he was silently keeping. The nurse leaned closer, smirking. "You know what they say, money can dress you up, but it doesn't change where you came from. People like him," her voice dropped to a hiss, "they never really belong." The air changed. Even the machines seemed to hesitate. The resident's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering softly to the floor. He froze, praying she hadn't heard. But she didn't look up. She was too wrapped in her own contempt, too convinced of her power. The CEO's chest rose, fell, steady as a tide. But inside, memory cut sharp. At 24, he had walked into a hotel lobby after a red-eye flight. Reservation confirmed, black card in hand, and the clerk still told him, "This area is for real guests." He'd slept in his car that night. The sting of dismissal never left. And now, decades later, inside a hospital partly funded by his own capital, the same words, the same tone returned like an old wound reopened. The nurse scribbled notes onto the chart, her handwriting quick, her voice sharper still. He probably faked half of it. Fraud, scams, you name it. Men like him don't build empires, they steal them, and the world lets them play king until someone calls it out. She smiled faintly, satisfied with her own verdict, and placed the chart back on the hook. On the other side of the glass, the resident took a shaky breath. His instincts screamed to speak up, to step in. But his training whispered otherwise. Stay quiet. Survive the system. Don't rock the hierarchy. His eyes darted back to the patient, the man who hadn't moved, yet somehow commanded the entire room. The nurse adjusted the blanket, her hand heavy on his chest. Sleep, billionaire, she sneered softly. The world doesn't need another one of you awake. Oh. But what she didn't realize was that silence has teeth, and the storm she thought she controlled was already gathering, one heartbeat at a time. The chart swung gently on its hook, pages rustling like whispers of conspiracy. The nurse pulled it down again, flipping through the sheets with quick, careless hands. Her pen scratched against the paper, altering numbers, crossing out notations. No one's going to double-check this, she muttered, almost laughing under her breath. Who would believe him if he complained? A black billionaire, please. They'll say he's paranoid, delusional, we'll call it stress from his so-called empire. Her tone was light, but her hand wasn't. Each mark she made was deliberate, every false notation a dagger wrapped in ink. The resident's chest tightened as he watched from the hall. His training told him to look away, but his conscience rooted him in place. He had seen shortcuts before, errors, oversights, moments of neglect, but this wasn't that. This was intent, malice disguised as medicine. Inside the room, the billionaire lay still. To her, he was silent prey. To himself, he was steel, coiled tight. The words she spoke weren't new, they were echoes from a lifetime of boardrooms and lobbies, dealerships and airports. But this time was different, because now he wasn't powerless. He wasn't a guest. He was the man at the top of the chain, and she was digging her own grave with every stroke of her pen. The nurse leaned over, lowering her voice like a conspirator. A little extra sedation. Keep him quiet longer. Nobody will notice. Maybe that's best for all of us. The monitor beeped steadily, but the air thickened, pressing in on every wall. The resident's hand shook as he slipped his phone from his pocket. His thumb hovered over the record button. One tap, and he'd capture it all, the venom, the falsified notes, the soft threat laced in her words. He swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temple. The billionaire heard the faint click of plastic against glass. A phone. Evidence. His lips almost curved, but he held steady. Stillness was his shield, silence his weapon. The nurse replaced the chart and smirked, as if the room itself were in on her joke. Imagine the headline, she whispered. Billionaire brought down by his own body. Fitting, isn't it? People like him, they always think they'll escape the truth. But not on my watch. The resident's thumb pressed down at last. The screen lit red. Recording. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He only listened as the confession spilled further, each word damning, each phrase another brick in the wall collapsing around her. Inside the bed, the CEO's finger twitched again beneath the blanket, subtle, invisible to her. A code to himself. The storm is almost ready. Because storms don't announce themselves. They build in silence, then break all at once. And when this one broke, every word she had spoken would turn against her like shattered glass. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. The nurse moved with a strange confidence now, as if cruelty was part of her uniform. She reached for the medication tray, her gloved fingers brushing vials that gleamed under the cold light. Let's see, she murmured, scanning the labels with a crooked smile. A little adjustment here. More sedative, less monitoring. No one will question it. He'll sleep and maybe he won't wake up. Honestly, wouldn't that be easier for everyone? Her voice was casual, but the weight of her words hung heavy, toxic, filling the room like gas. The billionaire didn't stir. His breathing stayed calm, his chest rising in measured rhythm. But inside, the calculation sharpened. She wasn't just biased, she was dangerous, and she was too blind to see who she was talking to. Outside the glass, the resident's pulse raced. His hand clutched the clipboard so tight the cardboard bent. He had trained for emergencies, cardiac arrests, collapsed lungs, codes shouted down sterile hallways, but no one trained him for this, watching a colleague weaponize her uniform against a man who couldn't respond. He stepped closer to the door. His shoes squeaked faintly on the linoleum. The nurse's head jerked, eyes narrowing toward the sound. She straightened, smoothing her scrubs as if innocence could be worn like fabric. Then she muttered under her breath, "Somebody's always watching, but they never do a damn thing." The resident froze, heart hammering, caught between duty and fear. If he walked in, she could ruin him. A word to the supervisor, a note in his file, his career could collapse before it began. But if he stayed out, what did that make him? Complicit. Inside the bed, the billionaire caught the faint shuffle of footsteps, the subtle pause. He knew someone was there, someone listening. The corner of his mind sharpened. Witness. The silence wasn't just his anymore, it was shared. The nurse turned back to the patient, sneering softly. "You see, even if you could hear me, it wouldn't matter. Men like you never get believed. Money doesn't buy credibility, it just buys silence." She tapped the monitor with one gloved finger, each beep punctuating her words like a countdown. The resident exhaled shakily. His thumb hovered again over the record button, already active but not loud enough to be proof. He wanted more. He needed more. And then, as if testing his courage, the nurse whispered, "Maybe I'll call security. Tell them he's unstable. Say he lashed out. Who would doubt me? Who would believe him?" The resident's throat tightened. The lie was forming in real time. A weapon loaded in her mouth. His hand dropped from the clipboard. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed open the door. The hinges gave a soft groan, barely audible but enough to cut through the thick air. The nurse stiffened, turning, her mask of confidence cracking for the first time. The resident stood there, sweat on his brow, but his eyes steady. He didn't speak yet, but his presence alone fractured the illusion that she was in control, that no one had heard, that silence would protect her. And for the billionaire, still motionless beneath the blanket, the game shifted. The storm no longer belonged only to him. It had witnesses now. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound was small, but in the sterile quiet of the ICU, it cracked like thunder. The nurse spun, eyes sharp, lips tightening. "You're not supposed to be in here," she snapped, voice pitched higher than before, laced with a sudden, nervous edge. The resident stood just inside the threshold, clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield. His white coat was still crisp, his badge still gleaming with newness. But his eyes, they were older now, aged in a heartbeat by what he had heard. I need to check the vitals," he said, voice low but steadying. His words were harmless on the surface, but the tremor underneath betrayed his intent. The nurse crossed her arms. "I already logged them," she replied sharply. "No need to double-check." Her tone was authority wrapped in dismissal, but it was cracking, thin in the middle. The resident stepped closer to the bed, forcing himself past the tight coil in his stomach. He glanced at the monitor, steady, green, normal. Then his gaze shifted to the man lying motionless beneath the blanket. The billionaire's chest rose and fell, calm, unbroken, silent, watching, waiting. "You didn't log them," the resident said quietly. "You changed them." The nurse stiffened. "Excuse me?" "You falsified his chart," he said louder now. His voice shook, but not with fear, with conviction trying to claw its way out. "I heard everything, every word." Her eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. "You're imagining things. Stress. You're new, you don't know how this works." He shook his head. I know enough. Enough to know this isn't medicine. It's prejudice, and it's wrong." For a moment, the room held its breath. The monitor kept its rhythm, steady as a drumline in the silence. The nurse laughed, short and brittle. "What do you think you're going to do? Report me? No one will believe you. I've been here 15 years. You're a resident. Disposable." Her words were acid, designed to corrode his resolve. But the resident stood his ground. He felt his phone warm in his pocket, the recording still running, evidence growing with every second. "I don't need them to believe me," he said, voice steadier now, "because he heard you too." The nurse froze. For the first time, her eyes flicked down to the patient, the stillness, the steady breath, the closed eyes. Something in her expression faltered a crack of doubt, slicing through her confidence. She forced a scoff. "He's unconscious. He doesn't know a thing." Ugh. The resident's jaw clenched. He didn't argue, he didn't need to. Because the truth was already sitting between them, heavy and undeniable. The nurse grabbed the chart again, flipping it closed with a snap. "You'd better keep quiet," she hissed. "For your own good. Careers get destroyed for less than this." The resident didn't answer. He didn't move. He simply stood his ground, one trembling hand on the rail of the bed, his silence louder than her threats. And beneath the blanket, the billionaire's finger twitched again, small, precise, a silent promise. The storm is almost here. The nurse's hand trembled as she shoved the chart back onto its hook, the papers rattling against metal. The sound was sharp, brittle, like glass about to break. She turned on the resident, eyes blazing. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "And if you value your career, you'll stay quiet." The resident didn't move. His jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the rail of the bed until his knuckles turned pale. "You falsified his record," he said again, quieter this time, but heavier. "And you said things I can't unhear." Her breath caught. Then she straightened her scrubs and reached for the wall phone mounted beside the bed. "Security," she said coldly, lifting the receiver. "We've got a situation, patient unstable, possible threat to staff." The words sliced through the air like a blade. The resident's stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" Her tone was ice. "Protecting this hospital. Protecting myself. No one will question me, they never do. He's just another liability. And you? You'll be forgotten before the ink dries on your badge." The phone line clicked as she spoke into it, rehearsed, precise, as if she had done this before. Her voice was sharp enough to carry through the halls. "Immediate response requested. Uncooperative patient, potential aggression." Oh, but the patient hadn't moved. Not once. The resident looked down at him, panic flickering in his chest. The man lay still, calm, yet there was something in the air around him, an invisible gravity, a waiting storm, and then he saw it. The faintest shift of a hand beneath the blanket. One finger, deliberate, pressing into the mattress. It wasn't random, it was signal. The resident blinked. His breath steadied. He wasn't alone. The nurse hung up the phone, satisfaction flickering across her face. "That's it," she said flatly. "He'll be removed. Safer for all of us." Removed. A word meant for criminals, not patients. The resident's chest tightened. His thumb brushed his phone in his pocket, the recording still glowing red. Proof. Evidence. But fear still gnawed at him. Would it matter? Would anyone listen? The nurse stepped closer to the bed, her shadow spilling across the patient's face. "If you had any dignity, you'd stay asleep," she hissed. "The world doesn't need you awake." The room thickened, heavy with contempt and consequence. And then, for the first time, the billionaire's chest rose deeper, steadier. His lips parted, not enough to speak, but enough to remind himself. The silence was ending soon. Outside, faint footsteps echoed down the corridor, security answering a call built on lies. The resident swallowed hard, eyes darting to the door. Time was collapsing, and choice pressed on his shoulders. Stay silent or stand up. Inside the bed, the billionaire's finger pressed once more into the mattress, firmer this time. A signal not just to himself, but to anyone brave enough to notice. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. The door swung open with a heavy thud. Two security officers stepped in, uniforms crisp, radios crackling. Their boots echoed against the linoleum, each step a warning. The nurse pointed sharply toward the bed. "That's him," she declared, her voice steady, rehearsed. "The patient's unstable. He's been thrashing, threatening staff. I tried to calm him down, but I need backup." The words landed like lead, a false script, spoken with the confidence of someone who had used it before. The resident's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, then stopped. His pulse thundered in his ears. His career, his future, balanced on the edge of what he chose next. The officers scanned the room, their eyes moving from the nurse to the silent patient, then to the resident standing rigid near the bed. The billionaire's chest rose and fell in measured rhythm, calm, untouched by the chaos gathering around him. The younger officer frowned. "He doesn't look unstable." The nurse's voice cut sharp. "He was moments ago. I know what I saw. You need to restrain him before this escalates." The resident clenched his fists. He couldn't stay silent. "Not now." "That's not true," he said, his voice louder than he expected. "He hasn't moved. He hasn't said a word. She's lying." The nurse's head snapped toward him, eyes blazing. "Watch your tone, intern. You're out of your depth." The officers hesitated, their hands hovering near the restraints clipped to their belts. The tension crackled, thick enough to choke. The resident took a step forward, words tumbling out before fear could stop them. "I heard her. I heard everything she said. She falsified his records. She threatened him, and she just lied to your face." The nurse barked out a brittle laugh. He's delirious. Fresh out of med school, doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't listen to him. This patient is dangerous. Dangerous. A word that had shadowed the billionaire his entire life, following him into boardrooms, airports, hotels. Dangerous because of his skin, his silence, his presence. And now, even in a hospital bed, it followed him still. The younger officer shifted uneasily. Ma'am, his vitals are steady. No signs of distress. Check the chart, the nurse snapped, shoving it into his hands. It's all there. The resident's heart pounded. His voice broke sharp. She changed it. I watched her. She wrote lies on those pages. The officer flipped through the notes, confusion knitting his brow. The numbers didn't match, the monitor still beeping steadily at the bedside. The nurse's face flushed. It must have been a mistake. Mistake? The resident's voice rose, shaking but sure. You called him a fraud. You said he doesn't belong here. You threatened to sedate him longer than prescribed. The room froze. The officers exchanged glances, doubt creeping into their eyes. The billionaire remained still, his silence now louder than any protest. He let the storm swirl above him, gathering weight. Because storms break at the right moment, and this moment was almost ready. The nurse's voice cracked, desperate. Why would I lie? Who are you going to believe? A seasoned nurse? Or a rookie? Look at him. He's nobody. Her words cut off. The billionaire's eyelids twitched. Barely. Just enough. The officers leaned forward, caught between doubt and duty. And for the first time, the balance in the room began to shift. The room was a battlefield of silence and accusation, the air vibrating with unfinished truths. The officers shifted uneasily, caught between a nurse's authority and a resident's trembling defiance. Then it happened. The patient's eyelids flickered, not a spasm, not a trick of the light deliberate. His eyes opened, dark and steady, locking the room in place. The nurse froze, words strangled in her throat. For the first time, the mask slipped, and fear cracked through her practiced authority. The resident exhaled sharply, relief and awe colliding in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. The billionaire didn't sit up, not yet. He let the moment breathe, the weight of his gaze cutting sharper than any shout. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, smooth, and impossible to ignore. "Rachel," he murmured, barely above a whisper. The nurse blinked, confused. What did you say?" But the resident understood first. The man wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking into the small black device resting discreetly on the bedside table, its light blinking faintly. A Bluetooth line, always live, always listening. A calm female voice answered instantly through the room's silence, carried by a tiny speaker embedded in the monitor. "Yes, sir. Logged and recording. Do you want me to escalate?" The nurse's face drained of color. What is this?" The billionaire's lips curved into the faintest smile, his eyes never leaving hers. "Protocol is active," he said softly. "Document everything." The resident's pulse surged. He had no idea what protocol meant, but the certainty in the man's tone said enough. This wasn't improvised. This was planned. The younger security officer stepped back, unease spreading across his face. "Sir, do you want us to stay?" The billionaire's gaze slid toward him, calm but commanding. "Stay," he said. "You'll want to hear what happens next." The nurse's composure fractured further. "He's delirious," she spat, scrambling for ground. "This is all nonsense." He's confused. But the voice from the speaker cut her off. Precise and cold. Timestamp confirmed. Nurse's false statements logged. Chart discrepancies noted. Incident escalation underway. The words echoed through the sterile room like a verdict. The nurse stumbled back a step, her breath ragged. No, this isn't real. He's just a patient." The billionaire finally sat up, slow, deliberate, as if gravity itself bowed to his timing. He adjusted the blanket, his movements calm but charged with authority. His eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "You should have stayed silent," he said quietly. "Instead, you showed me everything I needed to see." The resident's throat tightened. He realized now the man hadn't been powerless at all. He had been listening, recording, building a case with every second of her arrogance. Outside, footsteps echoed again, more staff, more eyes about to enter. The storm was no longer contained to four walls. It was spreading, inevitable. The billionaire straightened his posture fully now, his presence filling the room. Not as a patient, not as a victim, but as someone holding the weight of truth in his hands. And the nurse, who moments earlier had smirked in triumph, now looked like prey caught in a floodlight. The door slammed open again, this time with urgency. A man in a tailored jacket stormed in, flanked by another nurse in scrubs. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent light. Clinical Manager, V. Harris. "What's going on here?" His voice cracked like a gavel. He scanned the room, landing first on the billionaire now sitting upright in the bed. "Why is the patient out of position? Who authorized this?" The blonde nurse rushed forward, seizing her chance. "Sir, thank God you're here. He became unstable. The intern was interfering, and now he's pretending the patient's some kind of corporate spy." The manager's gaze narrowed on the resident. "Is that true?" The resident's pulse hammered in his throat, but he forced his words out. She falsified his chart. She threatened him. I heard every word." The second nurse, younger, stepped hesitantly behind the manager. "That's impossible. She's one of our best. She's worked here for years." The manager nodded, already convinced. "Exactly. She has credibility. You don't." He turned to the billionaire, voice rehearsed, firm. "Sir, you need to relax. This is a medical environment, not a courtroom. Let us handle it." But before the billionaire could speak, the calm female voice from the monitor cut through the tension again. "Timestamp logged. Clinical Manager entry noted. Attempt to dismiss witness recorded." The manager froze, eyes flicking to the device. "What? What is that?" The billionaire finally answered, his voice smooth as steel. "That," he said, "is the sound of accountability." The nurse's breath hitched. The resident felt the air shift, thick with the gravity of truth circling the room like a storm cloud ready to burst. The manager straightened, trying to regain footing. "This is highly irregular. Patients don't dictate policy. I will not tolerate theatrics in my ward." The billionaire's gaze cut straight through him. "You already tolerated worse. You tolerated lies. And now you're tolerating discrimination." Silence cracked. The words landed heavy, undeniable. The younger nurse shifted uneasily, glancing at the resident. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the manager silenced her with a sharp look. "Enough. We're ending this now. Security, remove him from the room." The officers exchanged looks. Doubt lingered in their eyes. The resident spoke up, his voice shaking but strong. "You can't. You don't know who he islanded." The manager scoffed. "A patient. That's all I need to know." The billionaire's lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. "Wrong." The calm female voice returned, louder this time, deliberate. "Board verification complete. Identity confirmed. Marcus Carter, chairman of Horizon Medical Group, primary shareholder of this facility." The words echoed like a verdict. The manager's face drained of color. The nurse's knees nearly buckled. The younger staff member gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. And in the span of a breath, the room transformed. The patient wasn't just a patient anymore. He was the owner, the authority. The man they thought powerless, now holding every card. The billionaire leaned forward, eyes locked on the nurse who had whispered poison into his silence. "You wanted me gone," he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Now we'll see who leaves." For a moment, the room was silent. A silence so heavy it pressed on every chest, filled every lung, suffocating. Then the weight of the revelation detonated. The clinical manager staggered back a step, his jaw hanging slack. The authority he wore like armor cracked and fell away. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The badge on his jacket suddenly looked like a costume powerless, flimsy, laughable. The nurse who had mocked, scribbled, lied, her face drained of color. Her grip on the chart loosened until it slipped from her fingers, pages scattering across the sterile floor like discarded lies. She bent to pick them up, but her hands shook too violently. The younger nurse pressed against the wall, eyes wide, whispering under her breath, "Chairman? He's the chairman?" The resident's chest surged with relief, the validation hitting him like oxygen after drowning. He had risked everything, his credibility, his career, only to discover that the man he defended had the power to rewrite the entire system with a single call. The security officers, once rigid with authority, now stood frozen, caught between duty and disbelief. One of them unclipped his radio, then stopped, hand trembling. "Sir, we didn't know," he stammered, voice barely audible. The billionaire's gaze swept the room, calm but merciless. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to move. His presence alone anchored the chaos, turning their panic into judgment. The nurse whispered, desperate, "It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean any of it. It was just stress. Long hours, please." The manager cut in, his tone brittle, clinging to the last threads of power. "Mr. Carter, if there was any miscommunication, I assure you we'll resolve it internally. No need to escalate this further." The billionaire's eyes locked on him, unblinking. "Internally? That's what you said last time, isn't it?" The manager froze. Complaints ignored, records buried, witnesses silenced. His voice was steady, surgical. "You built a system that let her believe she could falsify records and call it policy, and you stood behind it." The words sliced deeper than any shout. The younger nurse shifted, unable to stay silent. "He's right," she said, her voice trembling. "I've seen it. I've logged complaints. They never went anywhere." The manager spun toward her, eyes blazing. "Quiet!" But it was too late. The tide had shifted. The truth was out, and it was multiplying. The billionaire leaned back slightly, the faintest curve of a smile at the edge of his lips. His silence wasn't absence. It was dominance. The resident glanced around the room at the pale faces, the shaking hands, the fractured authority, and realized what everyone else was just beginning to understand. The room didn't belong to the nurse. It didn't belong to the manager. It belonged to him, and everyone inside it was about to face the consequences of forgetting who he was. The billionaire straightened fully, his voice calm but final. "Rachel," he said into the quiet, "initiate termination protocol." The speaker answered instantly, sharp and cold. "Confirmed. Nurse and clinical manager access revoked. Security credentials revoked. Legal notified." A chime echoed from the hall. The manager's tablet buzzed red in his pocket. He yanked it out, locked. The nurse's badge lit once, then blinked dead. She swiped it against the wall reader in desperation, denied. "No," she whispered, stumbling back. "Please, wait." The billionaire's gaze didn't flicker. "You falsified records. You endangered a patient. And worst of all, you thought bias was policy." The manager tried to salvage ground, voice cracking. "Mr. Carter, we can discuss this privately." "There is no private," the billionaire cut him off. "Everything you said, everything you allowed, it's already logged." The resident watched in awe as the power reversed in real time. The people who had held authority minutes ago now stood stripped, exposed, undone. The billionaire's voice dropped to a razor's edge. "You thought silence meant weakness. It never did. Silence was my evidence." The room held still, the verdict sealed. The room was no longer an ICU. It was a courtroom, and the verdict had already been delivered. The nurse stood pale, trembling, clutching her useless badge like it might bring her back. The manager sagged against the wall, sweat beading on his temple, stripped of the authority he once wielded. The resident, still at the bedside, felt the weight of history settle into his bones. He had spoken up and been heard. The billionaire rose from the bed at last, slow and deliberate, the monitor beeping steady behind him like a drumline to his authority. He scanned each face, then spoke with a calmness sharper than rage. "You tried to erase me with your words. You tried to bury me under silence. But silence is not weakness. Silence is memory, and memory is power." He paused, letting the words burn into the air. "Every time you dismissed a complaint, every time you looked at a black patient and saw less, every time you thought policy could excuse prejudice, you wrote your own downfall. And today, it caught up with you." No one dared to respond. Even the security officers stood still, their eyes lowered. The billionaire turned toward the resident. "You spoke when it mattered. Remember that courage. This system needs it." The resident nodded, his throat too tight for words. Then the billionaire faced the fallen staff one last time. "You thought I was asleep, but I was listening, and now so is the world." The words cut through the sterile air, final and irreversible. The storm had broken. Justice, quiet and unshakable, filled the room.